Hi, my name's Lee Jasper. This is Brixton, South London, and you're watching Lee Jasper Drive Time.
Our people in the spotlight, because the time's right. Black lives matter, pump your fist for the good fight. Good people take a stand, building bridges in this land. We chop it up and compensate reasons, this is drive time. We chop it up and compensate reasons, drive time.
Hi, welcome to Lee Jasper Drive Time for another show where we delve deep into the key issues that are affecting black communities throughout the United Kingdom and the world. Today, of course, we're waiting for the COVID-19 vote in the Houses of Parliament. Winter has most certainly arrived, and of course we're about to fall off the Brexit white cliffs of Dover into God knows what hellish scenario this country has dragged us into. But today, at least, you're with me, Lee Jasper, bringing you a bit of brightness and cheer. And this morning, we're going to talk about a very serious topic. And many of you will know that my career as an activist was based on challenging police abuses of power over the last 30 or 40 years. And one of the most earliest cases that I came into contact with was that of Richard and Audrey Adams, whose son Roland Adams was brutally murdered by a group of 15 to 20 neo-Nazis in 1981. Roland, who was with his young brother Nathan, was only 15 at the time, found himself in the southeast London being the victim of a broad rash of racist murders that were happening at the time. Many people know the name of Stephen Lawrence. Not enough people know the name of Roland Adams, and I take every opportunity and no apology for making sure that his name is remembered. And why I'm speaking about that is because, of course, his family, along with the Lawrences and many more environmental campaigners, trade unionists, political campaigns, stretching back for the last 40 years, have been subject to covert spying by the police. That's undercover police officers who secrete themselves with false identities, actually using the names of dead, deceased children, which is, I mean, it's just despicable even to be able to do such a thing. But anyway, that's what they did, and they got alongside all of these campaigners, trade unionists, environmental campaigners. Some of these undercover officers even had relationships with individuals and fathered children in their undercover persona. It is a sordid and squalid affair, and there's been an undercover policing inquiry that was announced by Theresa May in 2015. Now, I always noticed, and I wrote an article about it at the time, Theresa May used political inquiries, public inquiries as a form of Aikido, using the strength of your opponent against you. She always concedes to demands for public inquiries, particularly on the most difficult issues, because then she can tie it up in constitutional rules and processes, laws, and find a convenient judge, a chair. We've seen it in the sex abuse inquiry, child sex abuse inquiry. We've seen it in the Grenfell inquiry, and now we're seeing it in the undercover policing inquiry. 5 years on, £30 million later, 200 co-participants, a whole galaxy of lawyers representing those who've been affected and spied upon. And this morning, we're going to focus on what that inquiry is about. It was only started in November of this year, some 5 years after it was announced. And it's been adjourned now for over the Christmas period. And this morning, I'm delighted to say I'm joined by Richard and Audrey Adams, the parents of Roland Adams, and Jane Dayton, solicitor for Dwayne Brooks. Remember Dwayne Brooks, who was with Stephen Lawrence at the point he died and was treated appallingly by the Metropolitan Police Service, and I have to say by members of our own community. And of course, she represents my old mate, Ken Livingston, who, as chair of the Anti-Racist Alliance and so on, was the subject of spying. You may ask, weren't you the subject of spying, Lee? And I would say, of course we were. But I didn't think I was going to waste 5 years, 6 years of my life preparing for an inquiry that was going to be a sham. And I'm unfortunately been proven right. And today we are joined by Richard, Audrey and Jane. Guys, thank you so much for coming on today. So here we are at the point where you've entered an inquiry. You're hoping for the bright light of transparency, truth and justice to be shone on who spied on you, what they were up to, and how they got on. How's it been going so far?
Well, I think we should remind everyone about what happened that fateful night when Roland was murdered.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to.
Yeah, well, our two sons, Roland and Nathan, 15 and 14 years old, simply went to play table tennis over at Thamesmead. And, you know, they on the way back, standing at a bus stop, they were set upon by a gang of about 15 to 20, as you stated, white racist. And Roland was stabbed almost immediately, and he shouted to his brother, "Run!" And that's how they got separated, and they ran. And Nathan returned towards where he felt that he could meet up with Roland, and he found him dying. And you know, and the rest is history to a degree. You know, the police tried to frame it, you know, as a territorial fight and all the rest of it. It was, you know, none of the perpetrators knew of my children. You know, it was an unprovoked attack. They didn't know anything about what was going on, broadly speaking, over there at the time. And you mentioned that that Dwayne Brooks was treated appallingly by the police. My son equally, Nathan, my surviving son, he was treated exactly in the same fashion as Dwayne Brooks. And the CPS and the police connived to have this, not as a racist murder, but more of a territorial dispute and all the rest of it. And the defending barristers didn't have to do anything. The work of the defendants, lawyers, they didn't have to do anything because the police and the CPS painted a sufficient picture of what their clients did or did not do, or how they acted. So you know, I mean, in murder cases that people don't know, you know, you can't choose your barristers and solicitors and all the rest of it. It's done by the state. And if the state is against you, you're in big trouble. And it was up to the judge to basically, you know, impartially look through the literature and what was said at the time of the murder and the witness statements and all the rest of it. And he concluded that it was a racist murder, you know, something that, you know, the brains and the intelligence of the police and the CPS, they were unable to see in all the evidence they had at their disposal, which was exactly the same as the judges, but they came to two different, you know,
Conclusions. We all remember, well, I should say I remember, obviously vividly remember, the incidents and the case of Roland, which you describe there. And of course, out of the whole group of neo-Nazis that were in the dock, only one eventually got charged with murder. And so there are at least, 14, 15 people walking around today, free at liberty, enjoying their families, who were responsible and informed in that murder and have not yet been convicted. And I think that to me has been the most powerful stain. That and the way that Nathan was treated, the way that Dwayne were treated, the way that all the victims back then were treated by the Metropolitan Police was if you were the problem, you were the criminals, you were in the wrong place at the wrong time. Whatever excuse they could come up with, they came up with. So it's you know, it's a timely reminder to go back and to revisit those issues. And I know that you've been working hard to memorialise Roland's memory in charitable works and trusts and great work with young families in Jamaica, and many more of those issues. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, we decided in, what was it? We've always, as you know, since Roland died, we campaigned quite vigorously to get justice for him. We knew. I just want to go back to that time, Lee. If you don't, if you.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to let the viewers know that after Roland was murdered, we expected justice for him and Nathan. What happened was we then became police suspects. The people that did the murder and were terrorizing us at the time walked around freely doing what they wanted to do. What really sticks in my claw really is the fact that you lose your child, another one was brutally attacked, and then the police then turn around and decide to put us under surveillance. And I don't know why this was done. When our family, you know what it's like in the black community, if somebody dies, let alone murders, everybody comes together to support the family and get them through that traumatic period. When our families were leaving from all over London and all over the country to come to support us in our home, the police would stop them at least a mile away from our house, near the roundabout where Roland died, to be honest, and turn them away. They had them under surveillance. They had us under surveillance. We couldn't leave our home without the police being around. We knew if you looked outside our house at given times, you'd see cars outside, people banging on doors, banging on flashing lights, literally terrorizing us. We'd tell the police, they did nothing. I remember it quite clearly that they did nothing to protect us. And then we ended up being, when we started the family campaign to get justice, which we're entitled to, nothing happened apart from let's put them under surveillance. What we going along with this, talking about this inquiry, what really gets me as well is that, remember, we are taxpayers. Me and my husband have worked. My husband's family, my family, both our parents came to this country, built this country after the Second World War, worked very hard, experienced terrible racism. We as first generation worked hard, had our children, brought our children up and paid our taxes to be treated the way that we have been treated then and now. But we'll get onto that now later.
Well, I mean, the fact that no justice there was a saying, wasn't there, back then that I remember. There is no justice, there is just us. And that's the way that as a black community we felt over the last 40 years. How did it feel eventually because I think we always suspected, didn't we, that we were being spied upon. How did it feel when Peter Francis, the undercover police officer, decided to disclose to The Guardian some years ago now that, in fact, I was that guy. I was the one who was spying on a family. How did you receive the news?
Well, we always suspected that, for obvious reasons, obvious reasons, it's obvious to us. I mean, my wife and I, virtually every day, we would, we'd receive telephone calls and you could hear clicking on the lines. You could hear also, we would have phone calls, not every breathing ones, there's just nothing there. And it was also, our family homes were broken into suspiciously, many of them. And you're talking about nothing other than perhaps, sort of like birth certificate and them sort of things would disappear and all sorts. But there was no reason we've never had a break into our houses before. But then
and it was several members of our family. Yeah. When we started to, really become active, several members of our family's houses were broken into. We decided at one stage that we wouldn't even have a phone in our home. Can you imagine that? Because you knew that you were being listened to. And when we raised it time after time after time. They said that we were
Yeah.
paranoid. It's ridiculous. No one took it seriously. Well, when I say no one, the authorities didn't take it seriously, but we knew.
Yeah, so I felt vindicated.
Yeah.
You know, because we've been saying it all along, and we've been even telling the authorities that, what's happening here, and but now I feel vindicated.
We weren't surprised.
Yeah.
It
We
was
were
like,
surprised,
okay.
absolutely.
But yeah, we weren't surprised.
And how have you experienced the inquiry itself then? This Sir John Mitting, Garrick Club, 72-year-old white guy. Well, he'd have to be white guy, wouldn't he? Most of the juries are white. How have you experienced it so far?
Well, the thing about it is, right, I just thought that, incremental, it's a hope that, incrementally, things are getting better. And, but quite clearly after the housing crash and now COVID, you can see, how racism is revealing itself again. And this guy is just, it's just a throwback to what was awful about our experiences in England. It's a public inquiry, but you can't have public there. We can't have live streaming in our homes. It's a public inquiry about us being wronged, but they're not listening to us. They're basically telling us what we can have. They're telling us how it will be done. I understand that the judge has never been on a equal opportunities training. He doesn't know anything about, the plights of black people in this country.
Well, of course.
It just beggars belief that you can choose. I won't call him a racist because I don't know the man, but it's quite clear his general behavior points in that direction.
You know what? Let me bring in Jane Dayton here, your solicitor, because Jane has had to had close-up forensic examination of this Sir John Mitting in action. Jane, welcome to the Leejasperdrivetime. Thanks for being patient with us. Give us your view on this inquiry. 5 years in the making, and already within weeks of hearing evidence, there are howls of discontent and objection to some of the rulings of this John Mitting.
Well, Richard hit the nail on the head when he said it was a public inquiry that is not public. And that's the core of this, and that's the core of the problem. Not only is it not public insofar as at the only hearing where evidence was taken, the public were banned. Participants, people who've been spied upon, like Richard and Audrey, if they wanted to hear the evidence, they were required to travel to a central London hotel right in the middle of the COVID pandemic.
Can I just stop you there, Jane? Can I just stop? So are you saying, just so that the public are absolutely clear, so the victims could not, in the COVID pandemic era, could not have the hearing live streamed to their homes? They had to attend in central London, and the public are not allowed in the public inquiry.
That's absolutely right. And let's just unpick that a bit. One person had live streaming, and that was the chairman, Mitting. Mitting decided that he would have live streaming to his home in the countryside, from which he would run the inquiry. Now, it seems to us that he recognised that there was an inherent danger for people to travel to central London in the middle of a COVID pandemic, and he was not going to put himself into that danger. He hasn't given a reason, but that seems to be logical if he allows himself to have live streaming. But other court participants, the vast majority, were refused, and they were refused despite the fact the case was made to Mitting that for very many people who've been spied on, people such as Richard and Audrey, the risks to them, because they're black, because of disabilities, because of age, is significantly higher than, say, the risk to me travelling to central London. So it was quite clearly discriminatory, these arrangements, quite clearly, in my view, without a doubt. And this was put to him and argued to him, and he simply dismissed it out of hand, said he wouldn't look at it. So not only do we have the public excluded, we have effectively the people who are spied on excluded, and we have the people who are spied on being subjected now, today, during the inquiry, which is meant to, according to Theresa May, bring them some sort of justice, themselves being once again discriminated against. It's simply unacceptable. But that's one bit. That's about the participation at the first hearing. But the secrecy really goes far deeper than that. The delays that you mentioned, Lee, of 5 years, is worth looking at what actually was going on in those delays. What was going on was that the police were making applications to try and secure their continued privacy, to try and keep themselves hidden from the public in a public inquiry into them. And so, backed with public money, police officer after police officer applied to the inquiry, either that both their cover name and their real names were restricted, i.e. that we wouldn't know about them, that Richard and Audrey wouldn't know about them, the public wouldn't know about them, or their real names were. Now, let's just think about this. And a third of those applications were not successful. So currently, only about a third of the police officers known to have spied on people in the last, since 1968, have their cover names released. That's 1/3. So what does that mean about the 2/3?
Jane was explaining to us why there's been so many delays over the last 5 years, and the fact that the police officers have used public money to apply for anonymity, and that's the least of the problems that they face. Jane, you were saying?
So if we just unpick that, if more or less 2/3 of the officers remain anonymous, how are people that they spied upon going to be able to find out that they were spied upon by those officers? How is the inquiry going to have any evidence about the activities and the impact of those officers other than from the officers themselves? So the effect of the inquiry's decision to anonymise these officers is basically to say, okay, we're going to run this inquiry only on the basis of information given to us by the people we are inquiring into. It is really quite extraordinary, but sadly it doesn't stop there, because obviously undercover officers create documents, they write intelligence reports, and those intelligence reports, we're learning, go from the undercover officers to special branch to MI5. Now, the first problem here is that the terms of the inquiry exclude MI5. We've argued, and to some extent we've been successful, to say that where it can be shown that MI5 are directing the activities of these officers, those directions should be considered by the inquiry. But we've got somewhere on that in principle, but nowhere in practice. And
Wow.
The notion that the people who are really behind this, which is MI5 and the politicians behind them, are going to be before this inquiry, I think is a fantasy that we'll be fighting to make a reality, but I don't feel hugely optimistic about that. But let's just think about these documents. We know that most people who are participants in the inquiry, there are special branch files about them. There's a whole file about what the officers say they found out about them. Some of it will be true, some of it will be nonsense. So you think the most basic thing any inquiry could do was to say to the participants, here's your file. This is what is being said about you. What do you say about the contents of this file? Not only have the inquiry refused to provide those files, They've actually said it's something of a distraction to provide those files to the people who are being spied upon. I think it's wrong. I think it is a breach of the Data Protection Act. If they're holding information about people and people ask about information, the holder of that information is required to hand it over, and they said, no, we're not going to do that. But then they are getting the inquiry getting some information from the police. They say they've got over 1 million documents. We've seen, and not everybody, but the people who were spied upon in the early days, in the late 60s, have seen about 5,000.
Wow.
And they were gradually published on the website. And what we found out about those documents is the other reason for the delay, is that they've been largely blanked out. They call it redactions, and there are redactions throughout them. So you get to an interesting bit and there's a great blank. So that's another element of the secrecy. And we can go on and on. They're not publishing photographs of officers at the time. And again, you know, if an officer's spying on you in the 1970s or 80s, are you going to remember a name if the inquirer's been generous enough to let you know the name, or are you likely to recognise a photograph? Well, a photograph would be really helpful, but no, those photographs are not, on the whole, being released. Would groups, activist groups, like to know whether they were spied upon? Well, we've been told probably about 1,000, if my memory is right, about 1,000 groups have been spied upon. We don't know the names of most of those groups. We haven't been told. So you asked a comment about the inquiry. It's not a public inquiry.
That's right.
And to my mind, it's barely an inquiry at all.
It's an abusive process, if ever I've heard that term used. It's usefully applied here. We're going to return to this in the new year. And Leejasperdrivetime is going to invite Jane and Audrey back to catalogue how they're experiencing this journey going forward. It's not a very auspicious start, it has to be said. But for now, I'd just like to thank my guests who've been incredibly patient.
Lee, before you go, we'd just like to put on the record that we never had any confidence in the process. We have no confidence in this inquiry. We want to see what records they have on us. We think that's our basic entitlement. I want to put on record as well, we are taxpayers. We need to see how our money is being spent. And this inquiry is not spending taxpayers' money correctly. We need to know what is going on, not just us, all of the core participants want to know what the police have on us, why they decided to spy on us, how long, when it started, why it started, has it stopped? Because we believe they're still spying on us. Those are the basic things that we want to know before we move forward with anything else.
Well, I think that's the minimum.
As Jane Dayton has said, it is an entitlement whereby from the Information Commission, we are entitled to this information. In any other sphere of life, if we ask for the information that you have on us, we would be entitled to have it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. We'll be, as I say, raising these issues throughout the new year to make sure that we shine a bright light on what is an appalling process, an abusive process, and a denial of justice. It's the Undercover Policing Inquiry is aptly named because it is an inquiry that is itself undercover. Well, thanks very much for you guys for joining me and being so patient. Jane Dayton, solicitor supreme and legend in the legal world, and Richard and Audrey Adams, very good friends of mine. We'll be back to revisit these issues going forward in the future. But now we're going to take a short break. We'll be back with you soon. Hi, welcome back to Leejasperdrivetime. Well, this week in Post Black Lives Matter, we saw the BBC commission a whole series of black programmes, one of which led by the legendary and award-winning film producer Steve McQueen, was Small Axe, a series of 3 programmes. First started with the Mangrove 9 A story of how this organisation in West London, an organisation I was happy to be a chair of for over a decade, fought against the abuses of the persecution of Notting Hill Police Station in an attempt to falsely jail them under riotous affray and fences. And I watched that programme, I was absolutely delighted. And then it was followed by Lovers Rock. Now I must admit, when I first saw Lovers Rock, because I was an old sound boy and I was the guy that carried the boxes up and down countless church hall, into church hall community centres and up and down two up, two down houses in Moss Hyde and Tuxteth and Birmingham and so on. I looked at it from a purist point of view. And I was actually critical of it when I first saw it. But after I started to watch it again, and I had to watch it again, such was the hue and cry on social media about Lovers Rock, I thought, let me have a look at this again. And when I did, I thought it was a much more nuanced, beautiful homage to the Lovers Rock scenario. But the third programme in the series, which aired just recently, was Leroy Logan's Red, White and Blue. And I got so excited for that programme. It actually felt like I was back in the day, and I saw a black person on the TV. You knew they were coming on and you got really excited. That's how I was feeling watching these programmes. But I want to discuss principally Lovers Rock, but the whole series, which I think was a fantastic series. I'm recounting my view about Lovers Rock. I actually think it's a beautiful love letter to the Lovers Rock period. It's not a documentary. It's not meant to be a documentary. It is a stylistic, artistic homage to the area, to the period in our lives. And I'm joined on screen now by Sara Amanda, cultural critic sometimes, worked with us on the, or I worked with her, I should say, on campaigning against the human zoo, as well as a writer and many other things, too many to mention. Sara, thanks for being with us today. And delighted to have you with us. I know you've had to be patient, so let me apologise for that, but we're delighted to have you. Your take, please, on the whole series and Lovers Rock in particular.
Okay, first of all, Lee, you've got my name wrong.
Did I say Ahmed? It's Sara Amanda. And I'm always calling you Ahmed. Why am I always calling you Ahmed? I have no idea. Well, let me get that right. Sara Amanda.
It's Sara Amanda, but it's a small thing, don't worry about
That's
it.
my Mancunian accent.
Yeah, I know. And we're almost family anyway, so I thought that Small Axe was absolutely brilliant. The whole series, I'm so in awe of it, and I think what we've done is we've brought representation to the BBC in our own way. We've controlled the narrative and we've told the story the way we've wanted to tell it, and it's beautiful to see representation. I just want to say with Lovers Rock, I want to give a massive shout out to Cortia Newland, who actually co-wrote that. And he also co-wrote Red, White and Blue, which we saw just Sunday gone. So I think, you're right. It's a homage, it's artistic, it's a sort of like stream of consciousness. It's quite abstract and quite conceptual. And I understand that people are not necessarily used to that. But no, it wasn't a documentary. It wasn't Melanie Shabaz's The Story of Lovers Rock. It was almost like a fly on the wall. It was like we were there. And it had so many layers and so many meanings to it. I was quite disappointed with some of the feedback and some of the stuff that I saw online. I found it very problematic because, it makes me question, what is it exactly that we want? We complain that there's no representation, and then we get the representation. People are not happy with that. Do you know what I mean? They want to sort of like nitpick it and say, we didn't sell rice and peas at a dance, we sold white rice. We didn't sit on toilet seats. We didn't do this, we didn't do that. They're playing the wrong... I think we've got to move away from that and see a beautiful piece of art, and it's black excellent as well. It's art that we've created.
I think you're right. I think that, when I looked at it first, as I say, I looked from a purist point of view because I was just a sound boy who carried the boxes. I thought, it didn't go like that, it didn't do that. And I'm a Mancunian, so you've got to forgive me because we're kind of unreconstructed in our cultural appreciation of nuance. We have to kind of cultural acclimatise ourselves to the more aesthetic interpretations of our art form. But I've watched it twice now, and the more I watch it, the more I fell in love with it again. So I've got to apologise to Courtier Newland here on live TV, because I think he's due an apology. He's certainly due an apology from me. But I also think that I was shocked and surprised at the strength of feeling. It was actually the strength of feeling of the community who were criticising it that made me go and look at it again, because anytime the whole crowd starts shouting, go left, I'm inevitably going to turn right. So looking at it again, I thought to myself, A, the strength of feeling is not warranted, and B, actually, if you look at this in its proper artistic form, it is a wonderful little, capture of life, just one day, that is a beautiful sort of reflection with themes within it of that whole era.
Yeah, and I think that we've got to go beyond just sort of like, here's a programme, watch it, it tells you everything that's happening. What I thought was really good and what came out of this, and if you went on Twitter and you had a look at, say, the millennials, they absolutely loved it, do you know what I mean? And they were talking beyond just what they saw on the screen. They were unpacking the layers, they were talking about ritual. There was some really beautiful moments in there. There was beautiful cinematography, the grade was amazing, the texture of the way it was shot was brilliant. And I found like that Silly Games scene, yeah, it was quite extended, but it reminded me of being in church, and like when you're getting in the spirit and you just kind of hold the moment and you keep repeating it and repeating it and repeating it. And they're things that we can remember, and they're things that we can identify with. The clothes, just certain little things, and I think people saying that, it didn't represent us in a good light, and they were very sort of like, this is how white people are going to see us. It's like, why do we care? What 120 minutes isn't going to revolutionise, however many years of institutional and systemic racism. That's not what it was meant to do. What it was meant to do was for us to reminisce. It was very cleverly done, and I think there were lots of layers. I know a lot of people had issues with the Rasta guy, like getting in the spirit, but then people get in the spirit at church as well. And if you've ever been to a Jazz Shaka dance, you know what I mean? Man's totally getting in the spirit. If you've ever been down to certain sound systems during a carnival and you see people getting in the spirit, and it reminded me of when we did Exhibit B and we just got to the Barbican, and we were, the drums were playing and stuff. We all got in the spirit then. I remember we had to pull someone out.
I got so much in the spirit, I almost got arrested.
I remember Ngoma. Ngoma was our chief steward, and he was like, my man was doing African dancing and everything. I got in the spirit. It was such a beautiful moment. And I remember us holding that space for quite a while. Do you know what I mean? Whilst we just let the spirit come over us. And I think these are some of the things that we forget. We are spiritual people. And when the music hits us and when the beat hits us,
we feel no pain.
We feel no way. We don't care how we look, because it's not about how we look. It's about that release. It's quite cathartic. And so I think I urge everyone to go back and watch it again. And not from the perspective of, I'm looking for a documentary, but watch it and get into the spirit of it, I
think you're right. I looked at that piece where they were singing Silly Games, and I thought Silly Games was a metaphor for our complex community life anyway, because lots of people do play silly games. And secondly, that it wasn't that's what happened in a dance. There was a spiritual moment that was trapped in time that was being repeated and experienced viscerally by the people in that room. And I saw it for what it was, which was a bit like you, a church moment, a spiritual moment. And there were elements of it that people will say, well, it showed this and it made us all out. Look, if you went to blues, good things, bad things, indifferent things went on, just like they did in nightclubs and everywhere else. No bad, no worse, but they did go on. And therefore it's valid to be reflected in there. It wasn't the whole balance of the thing, because, we saw the mummies cooking in the kitchen. And I thought their singing of Silly Games, which became a motif throughout the programme, was also really wonderful, because I remember my mum doing the same thing. And so, I think that people should go back and look at it again, and I would certainly urge them to do that. So you heard it here from Sara Amanda. I'm not going to detain you any longer because time is pushing on and you've waited a long time, but I'm delighted for you to be here today. What are you up to next? What can we look forward to from Sara Amanda?
You call me Sara Ahmed one time. One more time. That's going to be my new name. So basically, I have I've got a film in the Buff Festival, which is going to be on Apple TV at some point, so look out for that. It's called Where Is God Now, and it's quite a deep, wonderful film. So you can follow me and you can watch it. Massive shout out to the production team that made it possible. And yeah, some good stuff coming out. Look out for something coming out next year. I'm working with a theatre company here in Birmingham to do something during the month of August for Marcus Garvey.
Wow.
So yeah, some good stuff.
Sara Amanda. I'm still getting it wrong. I'm still tuning it up. But it's been a delight to speak to you, Sara. It's lovely. Wish you well in the future. And once again, I'm giving my formal apologies to Courtney Newland for criticising Lovers Rock when in fact that is a gem of a programme. Well, you've been watching us here at Lee Jasper Drive. Thank you very much, Sara. We'll speak to you again and have you back on. So thanks for joining us. And we'll take a short break and we'll be back with you after the adverts. Hi, welcome back to Lee Jasper Drive Time. Lovely to have you back with us. And now we'll join with our next guest on the Lee Jasper Drive Time, Neomy Bennet. Neomy Bennet was a young nurse. You may have heard of her name. She was subject to a hard stop. That's where armed police force their vehicles in front of you, forcing you to a stop in April 2019. They gave her a hard stop because she had tinted windows in her car. At least that was their excuse. She was eventually charged and the charges were eventually dropped, but not before she endured a harrowing ordeal at the hands of the police. She was a registered nurse, and as a consequence of her being charged with an offence, she had real difficulties in terms of her career and employment. She's a businesswoman, a successful businesswoman. Her Neoslip product is widely taken up within the NHS, helping those with thrombosis to live better lives. So I'm delighted to be joined by Neomy here this morning, and she's going to tell us a little bit about her experience and why she set up a new organisation focusing on racism within the NHS, because what happened to Neomy led to lots of people who were nurses contacting her to talk about how they'd faced racism in their employment and jobs and work. And I'm delighted she's been able to join me today on Lee Jasper Drive Time. Neomy, how are you?
I'm well, thank you.
You're well. Beautiful earrings, sister.
Thank you.
You're sporting the Africa Large on Ben TV. So, great for you to be here today. Now, April 2019, you're going about your business, you and a friend in your vehicle, you're subject to a hard stop. Tell us about that.
I think it's really important for me to say that although my my windows were tinted, it was at manufacturer's standard, so they were legal. My windows had a legal tint on them. So
I think we can all accept it wasn't because of tinted windows you were really stopped. But tell us what happened.
Yeah, so I was sitting in my car. I had done a nursing shift that day, and that particular evening I had been to see my dad, who's a musician, play at a local venue, and just about to go home. A friend was just about to get out the car, and it just became surrounded. My car literally became surrounded by white police officers demanding that I get out, and the allegations just seemed to escalate so quickly, because first of all it started with tinted windows, but then it went on to stolen property, then it went on to illegal items, and it just went on, and they came at me accusing me of things that I had no idea about. So obviously I've said to them, I'm a nurse, I'm coming back from, I've just come back from a venue. I'm not doing anything illegal. I basically said to them, you can phone up the hospital, which is like local to me, just to get confirmation. But because I named the elephant in the room, and I did say to him, I believe that you're racially profiling me, that seemed to get him really agitated and aggravated with me, and then it became almost like, because I wasn't doing as he was telling me to do, he seemed to just get annoyed with me. Everything that I said after that was annoyance, and I said to him, I'm so scared, because I didn't know what they were going to do, and I could see a plainclothes officer who had like, obviously, I think they were tasers, but, you know, he was kind of hand motioning for me to get out of the car as well. It was late at night, and I was absolutely petrified, because I've seen what the police do to young guys in my community. So, to be honest, I was absolutely petrified, but there was no proper explanation. And then I basically explained to them, and then I think where I was scared and I didn't come out of the car, they eventually dragged me. Two of them dragged me. One of them pushed me, the other one pulled me out by my head and my shoulders, and then they put me in handcuffs. And again, I was still confused, and then he was telling me, you know, you've been drinking, you've been taking drugs. And so I said, like, you know, basically you're feeding into a stereotype. Just because I'm black, you think that I'm, and that seemed to rile him up even more. I could see the anger. So I was standing on the side of the road while they searched the car. They literally found nothing. So I basically said, oh, like, please, can I go home now? Because, like, my family are waiting. And, like, the ringleader, the main officer, says, you ain't going nowhere tonight. And then they just basically put me in a van and locked me up in a cell. So for me, that was probably the most traumatic part throughout the whole episode, being locked up and not really knowing what I've done. And they had me in the cell, and they kept coming to me in the cell saying, do you know why you're here? And I say, no, I don't. And then they would just slam the hatchet and say, okay, we'll come back. So it was like they kept coming in. Do you know what you've done now? Do you know why you're here now? It was almost like they did that to punish me. And I guess where it just became so intense, they actually moved me to a more lighter cell after I spoke to the doctor, because I said to the doctor, I really don't understand, like, why I'm here. And it was just so intense. And I think the aftermath of being in a cell was just so, it was so terrible. And even when I was in the cell, when I said, you know, can I go home now? They said, you're charged. I said, what for? And they said, you know, you didn't get out of the car quickly enough. So I said, okay. Still thinking someone was going to wake me up, because I'm thinking, you know, how do I go from working a nursing shift, supporting patients, working on my business, which again supports patients, to be facing a sentence, not a sentence, but a conviction.
Yeah.
But anyway, to cut a long story short, they convicted me in Wimbledon Magistrates Court.
Convicted you of?
Taking too long to get out of the car.
What was the actual charge?
The charge, they called it obstruction.
So you were obstructing a police officer in the execution of his duty?
Yeah.
That's what they said?
Yeah, but I felt more like they were, I obstructed them maybe from violating my space, because I hadn't done anything wrong.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then it took me another, like the whole ordeal.
So when you were convicted, you were then removed from the nurses' register?
They referred me to the Nursing and Midwifery Council,
Yeah.
Because they said that it was so serious, the allegation, that they needed to protect the public, because I disobeyed them. So I basically had to get a referral to the NMC, which resulted in no further action.
Right.
Thank goodness.
Yeah.
But my employer did sack me, or not sack me, but they suspended me for a month, which again is normal procedure. If a nurse is involved in any police dealings, in order to protect the public, then they suspended it, and I had to write like a reflective account.
So that was so not only now you suffer the trauma of the policing intervention,
gosh, yeah.
but now your career's affected.
Yeah, it was terrible. It was so badly, because even like with my business, I run my business, and I apply for tenders to be on NHS supply chain, and in the tenders, a really important question would be, has any directors had any convictions? And you know it's going to be like not good, you know. So it kind of affected me in every way. And even while I had an appeal outstanding, when my existing employer applied for a DBS, it came up. That was before the appeal, and it came up as if this is a conviction. You know, so it was...
So while you were waiting for an appeal, even your employer, when you were checking whether or not you were suitable for employment, and they do what they call a DBS check, which for our viewers is a check to see if you've got any criminal activity. that the fact that you'd been convicted came
up
up again.
And not only that, the court continued to pursue me for the fine of £1,000.
Yeah.
And then they went to my workplace, they wrote to my employer and said,
take it out of your
take
wages?
it out of my wages. And I phoned them up and I'm saying, but I'm up for appeal. And the man said,
You've got to pay the fine.
You've got to pay the money. And I'm saying, but where can I get the money from? Because you've suspended me from my job. I've been suspended. I don't have any income. So how am I going to? But they just
Pursued you relentlessly.
pursued me. Yeah, it was so
And
stressful.
you did go to appeal. When did you go to appeal?
Okay, so the court went to appeal on the 22nd of May 2020.
So you had to wait a whole year.
Yeah.
And what happened at appeal?
Well, apparently they just looked at the case, a senior judge looked at it and said there's no evidence to have supported
The conviction.
the conviction or any of it. But for me, I kind of felt a little bit let down because I was looking forward to having my day in court to say, what made you come to me? Like, what was it that was so bad that I had to spend a night in prison and I was convicted and it cost me like about £12,000
In legal fees?
In legal fees. And so I was a little bit disappointed when I found out that.
So they just threw it out without hearing?
They just threw it out and said there was never any evidence in the first
So you've
place.
been put through trauma, taken into a cell, treated like a serious criminal, had your career affected, been hounded by the courts for a fine you can't pay because you're a business and your employment is suspected, and at the end it's a damn squib and you needn't even turn up to court.
Yeah,
it
was just literally. For me, I was so prepared for the case because, reading the police statements, one of the police said there was drugs in my car. I'm thinking, where am I going to get drugs from? I wouldn't even know where to get drugs from. So that was in his statement. And for me, it was like, I want to get to the bottom of this because it was never mentioned to me throughout the whole hearing while I was in the station. But in one of the police officers' statement, it said there was a quantity of marijuana found in the footwell of my car. I was so confused. Like I was so confused. But for me, going to court would have given us an opportunity to find out what exactly they found, where they found it, and most importantly, what did they do with it?
Because you've got to ask, haven't you? What is this the routine activity of police officers to invent evidence in order to secure prosecutions against black people? So the case has been thrown out.
Yeah.
You've suffered for an entire year.
Yeah.
And did you get an apology?
Oh, no apology.
No apology?
No apology.
No explanation?
No apology. And even trying to get the IOPC to investigate, they're refusing.
IOPC is the Independent Office of Police Complaints, just for those who won't know the terminology.
Yeah, so they're not.
So you put in a police complaint
I put in a police complaint.
And what's happened?
Oh, that came back and said there was no wrongdoing. They were just doing their job.
So officers racially profiled you.
Yeah.
Lied about their circumstances and the rationale for the arrest. The courts fined you and found you guilty unfairly and fined you. Prosecuted you to try and get £1,000 fine. Wrote to your employers
and the NMC
and the National Midwifery Nursing Council, and then didn't give you your day in court. I just want to say to people, this is the nature of the British justice system, and this is what we call institutionalised racism. It goes to the very top and it spreads from the police to the Crown Prosecution Service to the criminal justice. Because Neomy should never have been charged in the first place. The CPS should have rejected that file. The court, when it heard it, the first court should have ruled it out immediately. And it's a scandal that it took a year for her to get justice. But having put yourself in the public domain, and we've seen you on many times speaking about your experience, you became a point of contact really for nurses who had suffered racism, not on the hands of police officers, but within the NHS itself. Tell us a little bit about that.
And I can say some with the police.
With the police as well.
Yeah, so it seemed like some of the cases that we was hearing was how NHS hospitals have collaborated with police to secure not even a conviction, but just to secure a tarnish on the nurse's DBS. So sometimes it's a complete allegation, fabrication allegation about a nurse, and it ends up on their DBS, and it does lifelong damage where a lot of them end up leaving.
So you've just got to be accused of something, and as long as the police get involved, then it's a negative stain on your nursing career. Now you created equality for
black
nurses. This
Yeah.
is a network, a platform for black nurses. Where do people find that organisation?
Okay, so we're online, www.equalityforblacknurses.com. And also we're on Twitter, Instagram, and the rest of the socials.
Across the
Yeah,
social
but I think
media.
what's really important, one of the main things that made me realise how important the organisation was when we started to do research, and it's transpired that 62% of all referrals of black nurses to the council, to the NMC council, who to me is a replication of the criminal justice system, 62% of those nurses being referred, Lee, end up with no further action.
So those are black nurses or all nurses?
Black nurses,
So
62%.
the majority
Yes.
of black nurses who are referred to the Nursing and Midwifery Council for allegations of inappropriate behaviour or whatever, anything, no further action.
No further
So they're
action.
also going through a period of trauma, stress, and unfair allegations.
Unfair allegation.
Sounds absolutely outrageous.
Yeah, considering that black nurses only make up around about 8% of the register, 15% of referrals are about black nurses.
In total?
Yes, it seems that making complaints about black nurses seems to be...
Cottage industry.
Yes.
Wow.
And we are inundated every day. We're inundated with black nurses crying their eyes out. You know, they've been disproportionately treated. Allegations have been made against them. One of the nurses we working with, she started off as almost like a junior sister. And then while she was in post, she was offered a senior sister post, which was a higher level.
Yeah.
Once her employees caught wind of that, they started to sort of gang up on her and they set a plan for her and they trapped her and they encouraged her to leave the premises, because they all leave the premises to go shopping. And she was in her uniform, but she had a coat on top of that uniform, and they went and basically told on her. And it then transpired that their policy says, oh, you can wear your uniform in a petrol station, but not in a sports shop.
So hold on, somebody's left the building to go to the shop to get a sandwich or something, and she's had her coat on. And apparently there's some archaic rule that says when you can wear a coat and when you can't wear a coat while you've got a uniform on. Right? So what they did is use that sort of rule that was probably invented at the time when Mary Seacole was doing the Boer War or whenever it was, 100 years ago, and applied it to her now to get rid of her.
And
how long had she been a nurse?
Oh my gosh, she was like a super nurse, what we'd call a super nurse. And what they did to her, in fact, they demoted her back to a newly qualified nurse. She'd only been in the department for 2 months. She'd only worked there for 2 months. They demoted her back to a newly qualified nurse. They said, this is going to be on your record for...
how long has she been a nurse?
She'd been a nurse for about 6 years.
6 years. And now she's gone straight back to the beginning?
Yes.
For going out for a sandwich with a shop with a coat on?
With everybody else doing the same thing.
This is institutionalised racism. The Nursing and Midwifery Council. This is, how you reflect institutionalised racism. 62% of black nurses who are accused take no further action. It's absolutely outrageous. And that's why we need equality for black nurses, because they're suffering incredibly after doing a fantastic job in caring for the sick and elderly of the nation. To be treated like this is just unthinkable.
It's disgusting. You know, nurses come to us crying. You know, we've got a nurse that had been in practice for 20 years. Somebody, a racist, took her phone and sent a message to the rest of the team about the COVID and how she wasn't feeling protected. Now, that particular nurse, even though it wasn't her that sent that message, there was no evidence connecting her to that message. They sacked her on the spot, and they literally had security walk her out of the department. She's been a nurse for 20 years, and they sacked her for that. And this is an organisation that is predominantly white. So on that particular day when security escorted her off the building, she was the only black nurse in there. And that's how they're treating us. You know, we definitely wouldn't condone bad practice. You know, nursing, you know, it's very intense, and we don't condone bad practice, but we just feel that, you know, give us opportunities for training, you know, support us, and basically treat us the same as how you treat the white nurses.
Because there's a double standard, one for white nurses and white doctors,
Absolutely.
and another one for black
Yeah.
nurses and black doctors and medical staff.
Definitely.
And that's why the organisation is so
And
important.
it's blatant as well. It's blatant. Everybody knows that if you're a black nurse, you are going to get, you know, you're going to get the full
have a tough
force.
time.
So for me, like I say, it very much mirrors what I experienced in the criminal justice system. But a lot of these nurses, they've gone in the job to do a caring role. They're not equipped to be fighting false allegations. Like, you go into nursing, you don't expect this, but a lot of them now are facing it, and they're, you know, but Equality for Black Nurses, what we've done, we've got some culturally sensitive therapists who are supporting the nurses. We've got weekly Zoom every Tuesday. Again, you can go onto the website and join our Zoom sessions on Tuesdays, where we talk a lot about microaggressions, unconscious biases, and just basically the way it affects us as black nurses, because we go into the profession because obviously we love what we do, and we want to heal and make people better. So these kind of allegations go against the core of our being and
teaching profession and vocation. Well, you heard it here, Neomy. It's been delightful to talk to you. If Steve McQueen is watching, because I watched Red, White and Blue with Leroy Logan being a pioneer in the policing service, maybe you need to do a film about black women in nursing, because Neomy could give you all the stories you need for an unbelievable plot of injustice and struggle. But for now, Neomy Bennet, thank you for joining us on Leejasperdrivetime. We'll take a break and we'll be back shortly speaking to Patricia Lamour, so stay with us. Hi, welcome back to Leejasperdrivetime. Well, we're talking about the issue of racism in British schools, and a recent report by the YMCA, the Young Christian, was it YCMA? Well, YMCA, the Young Man's Christian Association, produced a report about the experience of black children in British schools, and the results were quite startling, shocking. They showed that the vast majority of black kids in British school experience racism, with over 51% of the young black boys saying they heard racism in schools almost every day and all the time. It also found that the attitudes of teachers, and this is young people reporting in the survey, the attitudes of teachers were seen as the biggest barriers to educational success for some young people. And it talked about the nature of structural racism being hugely problematic. Well, to discuss these and the solutions to these perennial challenges, and these are challenges we've faced in this country over the last 40, 50 years, I'm joined on Leejasperdrivetime by Patricia Lamour, MBE, Chief Executive of Aspire Education. Patricia, thanks for joining us today on Leejasperdrivetime.
Thanks for having me.
Another report, and there are acres and mountains of reports talking about racism in British school. I'm guessing that the report findings don't surprise you in any way. What's your reflections on that, and what are some of the solutions?
Well, I think, that's what I'm really here to talk about, to spend shorter time on all the statistics and more time that we delve into what are we going to do about it. I'm tired, quite frankly. I'm sure you must be, in terms of fighting racism. My master's that I did for the Institute of Education in the 80s was on racism in education. And I did a comparative study of England and the USA. And at that time, no one was writing about it. And I nearly didn't even get my master's.
Right.
But it was a fight, and I got through.
You didn't get your master's.
I nearly did,
because you wrote about racism.
Exactly.
Can I just explain to everybody that, you know, if you're doing higher education in Britain, and you decide to focus on racism, then you're going to lose some marks for the privilege.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
Yeah, it was a struggle. It was a struggle to become a teacher.
So you're a qualified teacher?
Yes, I'm a qualified science teacher. I've also taught in
So you're
higher
qualified
education.
science teacher,
Yeah.
because you said that almost underneath your breath. but
Yeah, science.
Yeah. it's one of
Chemistry
the-
and biology.
Wow, wow.
Yeah.
Science. Science teacher. My days.
Yeah, so qualified science teacher, and of course I've taught in schools in this country, in Germany, and I've actually headed a top school in West Africa.
So
in
you speak
Gambia.
German?
I speak German as well. Yeah,
So you're a science teacher,
yeah,
speaks German,
yeah,
you've run private schools
yeah,
in Gambia,
yeah. The top school.
to the top school, Medina,
Marina.
Marina. I was
Marina
close,
International.
I was close.
I'm sorry if I'm upsetting anybody else who's running the other schools, but it's one of the most foremost schools in that country. Yeah.
So one of the most foremost. So your experience, right, in relation to these matters is absolutely huge. And you're an MBE, having been
Yeah.
recognised and awarded by the Majesty the Queen and so on. So all that experience, all that exhaustion, all that you're tired. Where does it leave us in relation to what some of the solutions are?
Well, what gives me the energy and the passion and the drive is the belief that our children are geniuses. You know, there's nothing wrong with black children's brain.
Yeah,
Absolutely nothing.
yeah.
They can achieve just as much, if not more so. They've got to overcome the toxic culture of racism in schools. You know, many teachers, they learn about adverse childhood experiences, they
Yeah.
learn about trauma, etc. Racism intersects with all of those and amplifies the effects for these children. So therefore, you know, they will be depressed, they will be down, they will not feel worthy, they will be angry, righteously angry. They will be, you know, not giving of their best. So all the kinds of things that you think that have traumatized children. And there's been a study in America where one of the longest studies where they followed African American families over many years, and they've seen that the effect of racism, that black families are living shorter. They're getting sicker and dying younger.
So ill health
Yes,
and early death.
racism. So, and then even in the same where the YMCA report was put in the World Economic Forum, my eyes were drawn to another one by the American Pediatrics Association. So doctors who deal with children, and they've come out and said that racism is affecting not only mental health, physical health of children, and therefore that, you know, you have to do something about it. And they're talking about racism affects those who see it, who perpetrate it, and who are victims of it. So all three. So it's not just the victims, it's the perpetrators and the others who are the observers, bystanders, etc. So it is a traumatic thing. We also, as a Aspire Education Group, as our way of investing forward for the African and Caribbean community in this country during COVID times, we undertook a historic survey of African Caribbean parents, carers, teachers and support staff nationally in this country. And we had 1,145 views. That's double the amount that informs that YMCA
Right.
views.
So comprehensive.
So YMCA is based on 645 respondents. So we had double. So our survey is extremely robust in terms. And unlike other people's survey, we weren't commissioned by anybody. We commissioned ourselves.
Right.
So Aspire Education Group, Father to Father,
Yeah.
Black Sox,
Yeah.
many of our partner organisations, we work together. We want to gather the evidence for us, by us.
Father to Father is a local group in Hackney. It's got national ambitions, if not London-wide ambitions. What it does work with black fathers in relation to equipping them to emotionally be empathetic and intelligent in the development and the growth of their children. And Black Sox, BLAKSOX, is the UK's one of the UK's only black social movements. So those are the two that help support Aspire in development of this questionnaire, which has got to be one of the first of its kind.
Well, really, because, you know, we design the questions. So we don't ask foolish questions that we do not intend not to act on the answers, because I think that's a frustration. When many people respond to so-called national surveys, it's either someone's academic interest or a commission of inquiry, and you know how it goes: inquiry, inaction, report and inaction.
Followed by inquiry.
Exactly, followed by another inquiry. I mean, we know the Scarman inquiry, the Rampton report, the Swan report, there's so many reports.
The Undecover Policing Inquiery.
There's so many inquiries looking at this, and they keep saying, well, why? We know why, but you refuse to acknowledge why. And for instance, right now we have a government which is refusing to acknowledge that disadvantage is racialised. But disadvantage is systemic, And because of that, they will always be looking for individual answers. The outcomes for exclusions, for attainment across the board, from school to university, the gap between black and white students is going like this.
Widening.
It seems the longer you stay in the education system, the more the gap persists. If we start from universities, there's a gap of about 26.3% between white students and black students. And these are students who've been comparable, same kind of A-levels to get into university, in terms of getting 2 1s and firsts. 77.1% of white students get firsts. We're talking about 50.8% of black students. And remember, they both started with similar, in order to be, admitted into university, they've had similar admission A-level results. And then when you go down into A-level, you find that the white students are 3 times more likely to get better A-level results, top A-level results, than the black students. Then when you go down to the GCSE, you're talking about black Caribbean students, less than 3 out of 10. Less than 3 out of 10 black Caribbean students are getting grade 5 at English and Maths GCSE. That means that is the tipping point grade to go on to A-levels.
Let me ask you a key question.
Yeah.
Because that's not the experience of African children. So there's a difference between the educational attainment levels between Caribbean descent children, and African children.
Yes.
African children are often cited as doing better, the boys better than the girls, but overall they do better.
And do you know why?
I want you to tell us.
Because they've been living longer in this country.
Right.
And therefore, their parental input is like my generation. I would say they're about 20 years behind us.
Right.
And if they stay here 20 years longer, they'll be joining us. It will be a race to the bottom.
So you say that the longevity of the Caribbean community in the system here in the United Kingdom has degraded the community's ability to succeed. And if the African community stays here as long as we have, they may well end up with the same fate.
They may well. You see, the thing is, it's about, but also there's a key difference here as well. Many African families, they travel home often. They retain many of their cultural, perhaps their language. This is very, very key and very important, as you know, in terms of any sort of cultural heritage. And now that Africa is emerging, we've now got the Continental African Free Trade Agreement, which is larger than the economic...
Biggest free trade market in the world.
Biggest in the world. And we are now, and I think also the mindset, we now have stopped talking about the ethnic minority and talk about black people as the global majority. And make that paradigm switch, so that black children don't always think, oh, I'm a minority, therefore we cannot ask for anything, we cannot do anything. We are the majority on the planet.
So cultural resilience is very important in terms of any child's educational development. And those children who have greater levels of cultural resilience are better able to withstand the predations of a discriminatory system.
Well,
and I think the other thing is that the Caribbean descent community, being here longer, but also having lower skills and educational standards, means that they're invariably located in low-paid jobs, and therefore poverty plays a part in explaining that difference. but cultural resilience is going to be very important. So you've done this fantastic study. So how is it, when can people expect to hear the results and hear what you...
Well, the first thing we're going to be doing it in, we were taken aback a bit because we were establishing a consortium to bid for the National Tuition Programme. Yeah. And I think people should know about it, that there is a 1 billion fund out there where the government has given 650 million to schools, 350 million to the National Tutoring Programme, and they've made their decisions amongst the tutoring providers that should provide catch-up tuition for disadvantaged learners. And if you look at the actual leadership of who they've chosen, only 2 could we find out of 32 providers actually had any black leadership.
So let me get this right. So £1 billion is being spent in order that British children can catch up as a consequence of COVID. And your analysis is that out of that billion, from what you can see, you can only see 2 specific black providers. Is that right?
The 350 million was given to the NTP programme.
Right.
So they're the ones that, but it could be
750 million.
Yeah. The 650 goes to school, but there again, 96.1% of schools are headed by white heads.
Okay.
And here we've got 500,000 African, Caribbean and black other, according to DFE, children in schools. And when you do the proportionality of black head teachers to black children as opposed to white head teachers to white children, you've got 1 black head teacher for every 2,533 black children. Whereas you've got 1 white head teacher for every 284 white children.
Well, this is a scandal because what it means is that critical resources for black children in some of the most poorly performing schools are not likely to reach specific providers such as black companies, black organisations, black education specialists who can provide that culturally resilience and confidence.
It's not, especially given COVID, this is not just about tuition. You know, we've got calls for the black curriculum, for decolonising the curriculum. We need...
It's about black confidence.
It's about black confidence, about black leadership.
So where will people be able to find the results of this questionnaire?
If they contact info@Aspire Education Group, you'll be invited to the launch, which is coming up in December.
Very prestigious launch.
And we'll also be taking some of those key findings to there's a parliamentary inquiry, another inquiry, about the impact of COVID on education. And we'll be submitted under the impact on disadvantaged groups. And we're going to make the point that disadvantage is racialised in this country. 80% of the teachers and the carers in our survey have either witnessed or experienced racism or unconscious bias. So they're mirroring...
Reflecting the YMCA.
They're mirroring... I mean, in fact, probably, and if it's affecting the professionals, it must be affecting the children.
Okay, and for those parents at home who'll be watching, worried about their schools, their children's education, give us your top tips for parents in relation to making sure that their children, survive and thrive in what can be a very difficult system.
Okay. First of all, we've got to start early. So make sure that your children are school ready.
Right.
So get them.
Can I just say about that? Because I teach my children, make sure your children can read before they go to school.
Yes, exactly.
Because I learned to read before I got to school. My grandfather taught me.
Exactly.
And it put me at a distinct advantage, although I was an incredibly naughty boy in the end. But that's because I was too smart. Not to. But learn to read before you go to school.
Yeah. Alphabet, numbers.
Yeah.
Interact with your children. Get them to be confident, organised. That is the first, because many children do not come from our communities and from poorer communities school ready. That is key.
And isn't reading to your child and having your child read to you, these are, as early as possible, are critically important in terms of building confidence?
Yeah, definitely, definitely. I mean, if you look at independent private schools, at age 10 and 11, they're getting the children to take visitors around the schools, presenting themselves with such extreme confidence. Our children can do the same. And it is a fact that many black children are thriving, are doing well in primary schools. They can do much better. But then the downhill descent starts once we get into secondary school. So primary school is important. Make sure that they are equipped to do well in their SATs. The critical number, you've got to get 100 or over. That is the SATs mark. All children should
That's
be
the
aiming.
benchmark for SATs.
Benchmark, 100 or over. Then once they get into secondary school, you need to follow them. You need to follow them, particularly leading up to their choices at 14 and 15. Don't leave it to your child to choose what they like or
Right.
where their friends are.
That's right.
Forget that. You are the parent. You've got to be looking ahead in terms of so that when they make choices there, this doesn't close off a whole avenue or area of profession or apprenticeships. So the broader the GCSE spread, the better. And there are facilitating subjects. If you want your child to get to a top Russell Group university, there are facilitating subjects at GCSE. English, maths, sciences, the EBAC, yeah? History, and a foreign language.
Absolutely key.
Okay, so you've got to make sure that your child, drama, art, business studies are fine, but
Not at the expense of core
not
subjects.
at the expense of those facilitating subjects, because then if you don't have those, you can't then go on to do the A-levels, and if you're without A-levels at the moment, you cannot get into university.
Okay.
The access courses that they used to be, perhaps they need to bring those back to enable.
Well, I'm a child of the
Yeah,
access
I remember.
courses. I came out of prison being a naughty boy. Well, actually, I wasn't. I was arrested under sus charges. But it's a long story. But nevertheless, having got my degree, it was a consequence of being able to access access courses. And access courses where you go onto a course, they used to exist in this country. And if you passed the foundation year, you then got a guaranteed place at university, even if you had no qualifications when you left school.
They need to bring that back.
So they need to bring it back.
Yep.
I was a beneficiary of it, and I know thousands of people in my age group were beneficiaries
Because
of it.
it's about lifelong learning now.
Yeah.
Lifelong learning. It's not just about one shot and you do it and you miss it or you have to do it. No, the world is changing. Everything is digital. We need more skills.
Super flexibility is going to
Yeah.
be the key for young people, isn't it? In the future, particularly
Transferable skills.
in the digital economy, and transferable skills, as you say. So having that broad palette and range of academic learning is going to best suit your child.
And the most important thing, I think, the parents, you have to have the back of your child. They have to know that they can rely on you to support them through the school, and take their side and make sure they tell you, as I say, you must tell me the truth so I can lie for you.
Absolutely. I must tell me the truth of your life for you. Well, we're a Christian show here on Ben TV. But, making sure you've got your child's back. When my children went to secondary school, I make sure I go and visit every teacher,
That's right.
that they've got my name, they've got my phone number, that I'm in contact with them. I attend every parent. I was a school governor, and I was shocked at the extent to which some black parents just never turned up to parents' evening, leaving their children to
Fend
out
for
to
themselves.
fend for
It's
themselves.
no.
It's outrageous. So I think that all these things are important. Well, we're going to draw our interview to a close. Those are key aspects of advice for parents. Thank you so much, Patricia Lamour, MBE, for joining us on the Jasper Drive Time. Just tell people again where they can get more information about Aspire
Yeah.
Group Prep.
Our website is www.aspireeducationgroup.com, and also if you would like to write into us, info@aspireeducationgroup.com. And tomorrow I'll be speaking in Uganda about the
Well,
same
there
thing.
you go. You'll catch her in Uganda if you can. We'll be stuck here in rainy, wet, cold Britain. But thank you very much, Patricia Lamour. We're going to take a break, and we'll be right back after this short advert. Hi, welcome back to Leejasperdrivetime. Well, there you have it. We had a fabulous show this week. Richard and Audrey Adams, Jane Dayton, Sara Amanda, not Ahmed Jasper, Amanda. Cultural critic Patricia Lamour. We didn't have enough time for Richard Sudan this week simply because we ran out of time, probably because of my bad interviewing skills and talking far too much than is good for my own health. But we've had a great show. Now let's not forget that there are still 50 people waiting to be deported by this government on the 2nd of December, which by the time you see this, they will either gone or will have managed to delay that plane. So do bear that in mind, keep watching the news. Yeah, you can find Lee Jasper on YouTube, Leejasperdrivetime on YouTube, and you can find me personally on Facebook, Instagram, Jasper9594, or Leejasper at drivetime@gmail.com. You can email me. But for now, this is Lee Jasper signing out. And thank you for watching Lee Jasper Drive Time.